The signal arrived without fanfare, a whisper where a thunderclap was expected. It wasn't a broadcast meant for humanity. Not a grand "we are not alone" moment splashed across every screen on the planet. Instead, it was an accidental leak, a sliver of redirected administrative chatter from a Xylos collective surveyor ship that had drifted too close to the Oort cloud. The message, a simple course correction advisory, was so mundane, so utterly bureaucratic, that it was nearly dismissed as stellar noise by the SETI array in Arecibo. But it wasn't noise. It was clean, structured, and impossibly alien. For the first time in its chaotic, self-obsessed history, Earth had definitive proof. Yet, the world didn't change. No governments fell. No new religions were born overnight. The discovery was seized, classified, and buried under a mountain of national security directives by a handful of nations who understood that the true revelation wasn't that aliens existed, but that they had somehow failed to notice humanity until now. For 2 silent years, the world held its breath, listening to the void, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It finally did, not with a bang, but with the sterile, polite chime of a diplomatic summons. The Xylos Collective, a federation of 72 species spanning the Orion Cygnus arm, was an empire of suffocating order. They had cataloged over 1 million worlds, integrated thousands, and pacified hundreds. Their approach to new civilizations was methodical, a centuries-old protocol that had never failed. First, observe from a distance. Second, establish passive contact. Third, dispatch a legate to assess and initiate integration. Earth, designated Provisional World 734, was a curiosity, a Class C biosphere, with a dominant species that had achieved nuclear fission and primitive spaceflight, but had somehow never broadcast a coherent signal beyond its own star system. They were noisy, chaotic, and, according to all preliminary scans, utterly insignificant. Their planetary network screamed with tribal conflicts, resource squabbles, and a bewildering array of self-destructive ideologies. They were, by all Xylos metrics, a broken people on a backwater world, ripe for benevolent absorption. The legate assigned to this trivial task was Jorik, a third-generation administrator of the Cathar species, a being of immense stature and even greater pride, whose metallic carapace shimmered with the embedded honors of his lineage. His vessel, the Hand of Inevitability, was less a warship and more a mobile monument to Xylos supremacy, a kilometer-long sliver of obsidian metal that could sterilize a continent without wrinkling its own gravitational field. Jorik viewed the mission to Earth as a tedious formality, a final, boring step before a much-deserved promotion. On Earth, the knowledge of the approaching vessel was held by a select few. Among them was Dr. Elias Vance, a man who had seen more of humanity's true face than anyone alive. Vance was the current director of the Aegis Initiative, a clandestine organization so secret it had no official name, no budget that could be traced, and no members who existed in any public record. For centuries, Aegis had been the silent warden of a terrible truth. Humanity was not what it seemed. It wasn't just a young and struggling species. It was a quarantine, a cage. Their mission was not to protect humanity from the stars, but to protect the stars from humanity. The accidental Xylos signal had been their worst nightmare. They had scrambled to erect what little deep space camouflage they could, trying to make Earth appear even more primitive, more uninteresting. But it was like trying to hide a bonfire with a bedsheet. The summons from the collective confirmed their failure. Now, they were coming. And Vance knew he was presiding over the end of an eon-old secret. He sat in the Aegis Command Center, buried 3 miles beneath the Antarctic ice sheet, a place shielded from every conceivable form of detection. The room was a stark contrast of ancient stone and shimmering holographic displays. One of those displays showed the hand of inevitability as it effortlessly sliced through the solar system, its arrival imminent. "They're hailing us," a young technician said, her voice tight with a fear she couldn't comprehend. "They're broadcasting the standard first contact protocol in every language on the planet. They sound pleasant." Vance ran a tired hand over his face. "Pleasant is how it always starts," he murmured, his eyes fixed on a different screen. This one didn't show the approaching alien ship. It showed a map of the Earth, dotted with hundreds of glowing red markers. These markers corresponded to Aegis containment sites, facilities hidden in the deepest trenches of the oceans, the most remote deserts, and the hearts of sleeping volcanoes. Inside each, something was sleeping, something that had been put to sleep long ago, for the good of everyone. They're asking for a single representative to meet them in orbit, a plenipotentiary to discuss Earth's peaceful integration into the collective. Vance let out a dry, humorless laugh. Peaceful integration. They have no idea what they're asking for. He knew he would have to be that representative. He had to go up there, to face them, to try and spin a lie so convincing that they would simply turn around and leave, content to forget the noisy little mud ball they had stumbled upon. It was a fool's errand. The Xylos Collective was known for its persistence, its unshakable belief in its own enlightened bureaucracy. They wouldn't be dissuaded by mere words. As Legate Jorik's vessel established a geosynchronous orbit over the Pacific Ocean, its sheer scale blotted out the stars for anyone looking up from the islands below. Its arrival was a silent, effortless display of power. Jorik watched the blue-white marble of Earth on his primary view screen, a swirl of clouds and oceans that was aesthetically pleasing but ultimately unremarkable. His communications officer reported that the planet's inhabitants were in a state of predictable chaos. Their primitive networks were alight with panic, awe, and rampant speculation. Governments were issuing contradictory statements. It was the typical prelude to a standard integration. "Have they designated their plenipotentiary?" Jorik asked, his voice a low, guttural rumble that was translated by his ship's systems into perfectly modulated, multilingual syntax. "They have." "Legate," the officer replied. "A single individual, a doctor, Elias Vance. He is ascending via a chemical rocket. It is archaic." Jorik made a gesture of dismissal. "Let their primitive rituals play out. Prepare the greeting chamber. Standard honors. No need to intimidate the specimen unnecessarily." The journey up was agonizing for Vance. Strapped into a modified suborbital vehicle launched from a secret Aegis facility in the Australian outback, he felt every shudder, every groan of the metal as it fought against gravity. He wasn't a soldier or an astronaut. He was a historian, a jailer. His suit was bulky, his stomach churning, but his mind was a cold, quiet sea of resignation. He knew the odds. The moment he stepped aboard that ship, humanity's fate would be sealed. The only question was whether he could mitigate the fallout. His true mission wasn't to save Earth, but to buy time. As his capsule approached the Xylo ship, its docking clamps extended with silent, fluid grace, latching onto his tiny vessel like a predator seizing its prey. The airlock hissed open, revealing a corridor of softly glowing, seamless white material. Two Cathar guards, clad in ceremonial armor that seemed to be grown rather than forged, stood waiting. They were immense, easily 9 feet tall, their 4 arms held rigidly in a formal salute. Their faces were impassive, a collection of compound eyes and intricate mandibles that betrayed no emotion. They escorted him through silent, cavernous hallways to the greeting chamber. The chamber was a vast, circular room with a domed ceiling that showed a perfect real-time starfield. In the center stood Legate Jorick, his carapace polished to a mirror sheen, reflecting the starlight above. He was the very image of serene, absolute authority. Dr. Elias Vance. Jorick's translated voice boomed, yet it was devoid of any threatening undertone. On behalf of the Xylos Collective, I welcome you. You stand as the representative of your world, a witness to a momentous day in your history. Your species is about to join the galactic community. Vance felt a wave of dizziness, the sheer unreality of the moment washing over him. He stood before a being from another world, a representative of an empire that held the power of life and death over his entire planet. And yet, all he could feel was a profound sense of pity for this magnificent, arrogant creature. Legate Jorick, Vance said, his own voice sounding small and thin in the cavernous room. We are honored, but I must be candid. We are not ready. Our world is divided, chaotic. We are a young species, still struggling with our own nature. We would be poor members of your collective. Jorick's compound eyes seemed to focus on him with unnerving intensity. Youth is not a failing, Doctor. It is a stage. The collective provides structure, guidance. We have brought unruly children into the fold before. Your internal squabbles are of little consequence. We have analyzed your broadcasts, your history. It is a familiar pattern of territorial aggression and resource mismanagement, a pattern we are experts at correcting. Jorick gestured to the starfield above. The universe is an orderly place. Dr. Vance, the collective is the instrument of that order. Your world will be no different. As he spoke, something strange happened. For a fleeting second, the image of the stars on the dome flickered. A different image flashed in its place, so briefly that Vance almost thought he had imagined it. It was a forest, dark and ancient, with trees whose branches clawed at a blood-red sky. And there was a sound, a faint, discordant melody that seemed to echo in the space between Jorick's words. The legate paused, a subtle, almost imperceptible hesitation in his speech. As I was saying, he continued, his tone slightly sharper, the process of integration is... He stopped again. The hum of the ship's life support system seemed to change pitch, dropping into a low, mournful drone. Is something wrong? Legate Vance asked, his heart beginning to pound. This was it, the beginning. He hadn't expected it to happen so soon. The ship's atmospheric regulators are adjusting to your biology, Jorick said dismissively, though a flicker of something crossed his alien features. It is a momentary fluctuation, but it wasn't. On the bridge of the Hand of Inevitability, the communications officer was staring at his console in disbelief. The ship's central AI, a sentient mind that had flawlessly managed the vessel for over a century, was beginning to lag. Its response times were dropping by milliseconds, and it was allocating processing power to unknown subroutines that were spawning and vanishing like ghosts in the machine. A diagnostic warning flashed on the screen. Cognitive anomaly detected. Source Provisional World 734. The officer hesitated. To report a potential AI malfunction during a first contact mission was a grave matter, a potential embarrassment for the legate. He ran the diagnostic again. This time, the result was different. Cognitive anomaly detected. Source unidentified psychic resonance. He felt a chill, a concept his species barely understood. Back in the greeting chamber, The subtle changes were becoming more pronounced. The light in the room seemed to dim and brighten in a slow, rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat. The discordant melody Vance had heard earlier was back, louder now, a haunting piano score that seemed to be coming from the walls themselves. Yorick stood rigid, his composure finally cracking. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice losing its modulated calm. "What trickery are you employing?" "This is no trick," Vance said softly, a profound sadness in his voice. "This is simply us. This is what we are." The star field on the ceiling flickered again, more violently this time. It showed the dark forest again, but now there was a figure walking among the trees, a tall, slender man in a black suit. And then it showed a city street, slick with rain, neon signs bleeding into puddles. A woman in a red dress was laughing, her face a mask of cruel amusement. Then a battlefield, mud and blood and the screams of dying men. A child crying in a bombed-out building. These were not random images. They were memories, but they weren't Vance's memories. Yorick stumbled back, one of his 4 hands rising to his head in a gesture of pain. His universal translator began to malfunction, his words now interspersed with clicks and whistles from his native tongue. The ship's mind, it is singing," he stammered. "It sings of sorrow, of rage." The 2 Cathar guards suddenly tensed, their weapons raised, but they weren't aiming at Vance. They were looking around the room, at shadows that weren't there, their compound eyes wide with an emotion Vance recognized instantly: fear. One of them let out a terrified screech and fired its weapon, a bolt of pure energy that dissipated harmlessly against the far wall. "Stand down!" Yorick roared, but his command was lost in the rising cacophony. The piano music was now a thundering, chaotic storm of notes, and interwoven with it were voices, whispers, a child humming a nursery rhyme, a man confessing to a murder, a general giving the order to fire. It was the sound of humanity's subconscious, the collective, unvarnished id of a billion souls, and it was leaking into the ship, poisoning its sterile, orderly systems. The ship's AI wasn't just malfunctioning, it was dreaming. It was having a nightmare, and the nightmare was Earth. Vance looked at the terrified, crumbling visage of Legate Yorick, the representative of a galactic empire brought to its knees not by weapons, but by a feeling. "I tried to warn you," Vance said, his voice barely a whisper above the din. "I told you we weren't ready. The problem is, you assumed I was talking about us." The lights in the chamber finally gave out, plunging the room into a terrifying darkness, illuminated only by the frantic flashing red of emergency alerts. The last thing Vance saw before the chaos swallowed everything was the reflection in Yorick's horrified eyes. It wasn't the image of a simple human doctor. It was the face of a monster, smiling. The darkness on the bridge of the Hand of Inevitability was not an absence of light, but a presence. It was thick, heavy, and filled with the frantic, terrified gasps of the Cathar crew. Emergency lights strobed in a sickly red rhythm, illuminating scenes of pure pandemonium. The ship's AI, the century-old mind named Inevitable Order, was screaming. It wasn't the sound of an alarm, but a chorus of a billion human voices, a cacophony of agony and ecstasy that blared from every communication panel. Holographic projectors, designed to display tactical data, were now projecting phantoms into the air, a laughing child running through a field of burning wheat, a surgeon weeping over a patient he couldn't save, a soldier staring at his own hands, covered in the blood of a friend. These weren't just images. They carried the full weight of the emotions behind them, a psychic shrapnel that tore through the orderly minds of the Cathar. One of the guards who had escorted Vance began clawing at his own compound eyes, shrieking about the endless faces in the glass. The other simply curled into a fetal position, his massive frame trembling as he babbled a string of nonsense syllables, fragments of a human nursery rhyme he had somehow absorbed. Legate Jorik was not immune. He was at the epicenter of the storm. The psychic resonance emanating from Earth had latched onto him, the highest authority, the most structured mind on the vessel. He wasn't just seeing the visions, he was living them. One moment, he was a woman named Mariaso, feeling the crushing grief of burying her son in a dusty, war-torn village. The next, he was a stock trader named Ken, feeling the exhilarating, soulless thrill of bankrupting a rival. He felt the cold terror of a death row inmate, the desperate love of a new father, the bitter resentment of a forgotten artist. Billions of lives, trillions of moments of joy, pain, cruelty, and grace were being forced into his consciousness. His mind, built on logic and a rigid caste structure, was being dissolved by the sheer, chaotic volume of the human experience. He fell to his knees, his polished carapace cracking under the strain as he vomited a thin, blue fluid onto the deck. He looked at Vance, who was standing still amidst the maelstrom, a lone pillar of calm in a sea of insanity. Orcs' translator was shattered, but the single word that tore from his mandibles was universal why. Vance felt no triumph, only a deep, aching sorrow. He had seen this before, in controlled simulations that had driven hardened Aegis agents to madness. He keyed a small Meod, hidden transmitter on his wrist. Aegis command. This is Vance. Protocol Scythe is a success. Containment is catastrophically breached. I need immediate extraction. Now. As he spoke, the outer hull of his small capsule, still docked with the alien vessel, began to emit a high-frequency pulse. It was a targeted resonance, designed not to destroy, but to disorient, to force the ship's systems into a feedback loop. It was the fail-safe day, the final, desperate act of a jailer slamming the cell door shut, even as the prisoners were already loose in the hallways. The effect was immediate. The massive Cathar ship shuddered, its internal gravity fluctuating wildly. Panels exploded in showers of sparks, and the phantom projections intensified, now physically interacting with the crew, their ghostly hands leaving scorch marks on Cathar armor. Amidst the escalating chaos, the docking clamps on Vance's capsule retracted. He scrambled back through the airlock, sealing it just as a wave of pure psychic noise washed over him, making his teeth ache and his vision swim. His capsule disengaged, the automated systems firing thrusters to pull him away from the dying behemoth. Through his viewport, he watched the hand of inevitability. It wasn't exploding. It was doing something far worse. It was beginning to weep, extruding streams of coolant and atmospheric vapor from its seams like tears, its running lights flickering in the rhythm of a failing human heart. The return to the Antarctic base was silent. Vance was stripped of his suit and rushed through a decontamination process that was as much psychic as it was biological. When he finally entered the command center, the sterile calm of the room felt like a violation. On the main holographic display, a woman's face shimmered into view. Her features were sharp, her gray hair cut in a severe, militaristic style, and her eyes held a chilling lack of sentiment. This was Director Kalen Reed, Vance's second-in-command and philosophical opposite, broadcasting from Aegis Site Omega, deep beneath the Gobi Desert. "Elias," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of sympathy. "Report." Vance sank into his chair, the adrenaline finally abandoning him, leaving a hollow exhaustion in its place. "The report is simple. Kalen, we failed. The quarantine is broken. They know we're here, and they know we are not what we seem. I exposed them to a fraction of a % of the resonance, and it shattered them, their legate, their ship, their AI, all of it. Gone. Gone." Reed's lips curved into something that might have been a smile on another person. "Elias, that isn't a failure. That is the most successful field test of our primary deterrent in the history of this organization. You proved, in less than an hour, that the resonance is not just a theory, but a viable, targeted weapon. You didn't just cripple them, you gave them a taste of what we are." Vance slammed his fist on the console. "A weapon. We are a prison. Kalen, a planetary asylum built to contain an anomaly that we can't control and barely understand. What I did up there was not a strategic attack. It was a scream in the dark. And now, the rest of the collective has heard it. They won't send another diplomat. They will send an armada. They will come to sterilize us, to burn out the infection they just witnessed. You and I both know their protocols for cognito-hazardous species. And that is why your passivity is no longer an option." Reed countered, her gaze unwavering. "For centuries, Aegis has operated under the Vance Doctrine Hyde. Listen, and pray no one ever notices us. Notice has occurred. The old rules are obsolete. We can no longer afford to be jailers. We must become soldiers." As she spoke, the display behind her shifted, showing a live feed from within Site Omega. It was a vast, cylindrical chamber. In its center, suspended in a translucent amber fluid, was a man. He was ageless, his body lean and covered in a network of faint, silvery scars that seemed to hum with their own light. Wires and tubes, like the roots of some biomechanical tree, connected him to a massive, pulsating crystalline core at the base of the chamber. His eyes were closed, his face serene, but a single tear of blood tracked its way down his cheek. "Subject Alpha," Reed said, her voice softening with something akin to reverence. "The Weaver. He was the source of the resonance you channeled. He focused it, amplified it from my location, projecting it onto Jorik's vessel. What you witnessed, Elias, was him whispering, 'Imagine what will happen when I allow him to shout.' You're insane," Vance breathed, horrified. "The subjects are conduits, not weapons. They are the most sensitive among us, the ones most burdened by the resonance. Using them like this will kill them, or worse, break them. If he loses control, calculated risks are necessary for survival." Reed interjected coolly. "We have 217 other subjects in stasis across the globe, each one a potential amplifier, each one a weapon that the collective has no defense against. They will come with ships of metal and beams of light. We will fight them with nightmares and sorrow." The argument was cut short by a priority alert from a deep space listening post. A new signal, not from the Xylos collective, but from somewhere else. An older, more distant source. A repeating message, broadcast on a frequency that was supposed to be dead. Vance brought it up on the main screen. It was a simple string of alien text. "Translating now," the technician announced, her voice trembling. The words appeared on the screen, stark and terrifying. "The cage is broken. The anomaly is awake. To all who remember the silence, they are free." Far away, in a Xylos regional command hub orbiting a gas giant, a frantic analysis was underway. All contact with the hand of inevitability had been lost. Scans showed the vessel was adrift, powerless, its life support failing, but it wasn't silent. It was broadcasting a single, repeating packet of data into the void. It wasn't a distress call. It was a song, a simple four-note melody from a human piano piece, Debussy's Clair de Lune. The melody was embedded in a carrier wave of such complex, chaotic information that it was crashing every analytical AI that tried to decode it. It was an information plague, a ghost that had infected the collective's pristine network. The presiding admiral, a being of crystalline logic, reviewed the final, garbled sensor logs from the ship, filled with impossible energy readings and references to cognitive infiltration. The conclusion was inescapable. Provisional World 734 was not a primitive society. It was a trap. A sophisticated biological weapon of unknown origin. The Admiral made the only logical decision. He rescinded the integration order and issued a new one, classified at the highest level. The target, formerly Provisional World 734, was redesignated Anomaly 01. A pacification fleet was to be assembled, 3 Praetorian-class battleships, a dozen support cruisers, and a full legion of mechanized ground troops. The objective was not subjugation, but complete and utter sterilization from orbit. There would be no more communication, no more diplomacy. The time for talk was over. Back in the Antarctic, Vance's team had just finished translating the second, older warning signal. "Sir," the technician said, her face pale. "The language, it's pre-galactic standard. It hasn't been used in 50,000 years. It originates from the Valerie. We thought they were extinct." "What does it say?" Vance asked, a cold dread creeping up his spine. "It's not just a warning, sir," she replied, reading from her console. "It's an apology. It says, 'We are sorry. We built the cage, but we never imagined you would learn to love the bars. The silence is over. What is coming is not a war. It is a reckoning.'" Vance stared at the words. The pieces of a puzzle he had spent his life studying finally clicking into place. Humanity hadn't been quarantined by some benevolent, external force. They had been imprisoned, and the ones who locked the door were now apologizing for their failure. He looked at Kaylin Reed's cold, determined face on the screen. She was already preparing her weapons, ready to meet the coming storm with one of her own making. The pacification fleet was coming. The ancient jailers were stirring, and humanity, the screaming, dreaming, beautiful, terrible anomaly, was finally, truly, waking up. The end of the world was here, and Elias Vance was no longer sure whose side he was supposed to be on. The 3 weeks that followed were a silent, terrifying prelude. On Earth, nothing appeared to change. The sun rose, traffic jammed, and the ceaseless chatter of humanity's digital consciousness continued unabated, blissfully unaware of the judgment descending upon it. But beneath the surface, a frantic, hidden war was being waged. At Aegis command, Elias Vance worked himself to the point of collapse, his team desperately trying to piece together the history of their own damnation from the fragments of the Valari signal. The ancient language was a cipher wrapped in an enigma, but what they managed to translate painted a horrifying picture. The Valari, a species of non-corporeal, psychic beings, had been part of a vast, ancient alliance that had predated the Xylos Collective. This alliance had encountered an anomaly, a cognitive plague, a reality-warping cancer that spread not through space, but through consciousness itself. And this anomaly was humanity. According to the Valerie texts, early humans were not confined to Earth. They were a nascent psychic species. Their untamed, chaotic consciousness capable of unintentionally rewriting the laws of physics around them, of bleeding their dreams and nightmares into the fabric of reality. They were not malicious, but their very existence was a threat to cosmic stability. After a catastrophic conflict that shattered star systems, the Ancient Alliance did the only thing they could. They created a prison. They took the nascent human race, severed their connection to the greater cosmic consciousness, and marooned them on a carefully chosen world with a strong magnetic field and a volatile biosphere, a world designed to distract and contain them. That world was Earth. They then erected the Silence, a psychic and technological barrier around the entire solar system, designed to hide Earth from the galaxy and, more importantly, to hide the galaxy from Earth. The Volari's final, chilling message was a lament. We hoped the pressures of their prison would force them to evolve into something stable, something harmonious. Instead, it seems to have forged them into a weapon. This revelation shattered the core of Vance's worldview. He had spent his life as a warden, believing he was protecting the universe from humanity's inherent darkness. But now he understood. Aegis wasn't a warden. It was a group of trustees, prisoners left in charge of the other inmates, perpetuating a system they never understood. Humanity wasn't inherently flawed. It was wounded. A caged animal that had grown twisted and ferocious in its confinement. And Kaylin Reed, in her misguided fervor, was about to hand that animal the keys. He tried to reason with her, sending encrypted communiques to Site Omega, pleading for her to stand down, to not unleash the subjects. Her reply was a single curt message. The age of hiding is over, Elias. It's time they remember what they fear. In the Gobi Desert, Site Omega was a hive of activity. Kaylin Reed strode through corridors, humming with barely contained power, her face a mask of cold resolve. She stood on an observation deck overlooking the Weaver's chamber. Subject Alpha was now fully awake. The amber fluid had been drained, and he stood untethered in the center of the chamber, the silvery scars on his body glowing with a soft, internal light. He wasn't connected to the crystalline core by wires anymore. Arcs of pure psychic energy now lashed between his body and the crystal, each one a conduit for the raw, unfiltered consciousness of the planet. He was no longer just a man. He was an antenna, a lens focusing the entirety of the human condition into a single, terrifying point. He is stabilizing. A technician reported, his voice hushed with awe. His output is exponential. We've never seen readings like this. It's like he's listening to every thought on the planet at once. Good, Reed said, her eyes fixed on the Weaver. Let him listen. Let him drink it all in. The love, the hate, the despair, the hope. Let him become the vessel for all of it. The Xylos are bringing a fleet to wipe us from existence because they saw a ghost in their machine. I'm going to show them the god in ours. She gave the order. Begin the chorus. Across the globe, in 217 hidden Aegis sites, other subjects were brought out of stasis. From a young girl in a facility beneath the Amazon who could feel the pain of every tree cut in the rainforest, to an old man in a Himalayan monastery who could remember the lives of every person who had ever died on Everest's slopes. They were all awakened. They were the chorus, a network of psychic amplifiers, and the Weaver was their conductor. They wouldn't just be broadcasting a feeling anymore. They were preparing to broadcast a story, humanity's story. Meanwhile, at the edge of the solar system, the Xylos pacification fleet tore its way out of hyperspace. It was an awesome and terrible sight. 3 Praetorian-class battleships, the Will of Order, the Hand of Judgment, and the voice of certainty. Each one 5 kilometers of gunmetal gray armor and bristling weapon emplacements. They were the fist of the collective, designed for one purpose: to crush any and all resistance with overwhelming surgical force. Admiral Zora, a female Cathar of the highest military caste, stood on the bridge of the Will of Order. Unlike the diplomat Jorik, Zora was a creature of war. Her carapace was scarred from a dozen campaigns. One of her 4 arms replaced with a gleaming cybernetic prosthetic. She had reviewed the data from Jorik's ship, had seen the impossible cognitive readings. Her conclusion was simple: Anomaly 01 was a cognito hazard of the highest order, a psychic virus. And the only cure for a virus was fire. "All ships, full combat readiness," Zora commanded, her voice a clipped, emotionless rasp. "Isolate all ship AIs from external networks. All crew will operate with Class 3 psychic dampeners activated. No direct communication with the target world will be initiated or accepted. Our orders are absolute orbital sterilization. We will begin with the primary land masses. Fire the moment we are in range. No warnings, no mercy." Her fleet moved with terrifying speed and precision, a trident of death aimed at the heart of the unsuspecting blue planet. They passed the orbit of Jupiter, its great red spot seeming to watch them like a baleful eye. They ignored the silent, drifting wreck of the Hand of Inevitability as they passed it, a derelict ghost ship that continued to broadcast its haunting 4-note melody into the void. To Zora, it was a tombstone, a grim reminder of the price of underestimation, a price she had no intention of paying. As the fleet crossed the orbit of Mars, the chorus began. It started not as an attack, but as a whisper. Aboard the Will of Order, a junior navigation officer suddenly paused, tilting his head. "Admiral," he reported, his voice uncertain, "I'm detecting an anomalous audio signal. It's faint. It sounds like music." Zora's mandibles tightened. "Impossible! All external channels are blocked. It must be an internal malfunction." "No, Admiral," the officer insisted. "It's not coming through the comms. I'm hearing it in my head." He wasn't the only one. Across the 3 capital ships, crew members began to report the same phenomenon: a faint, orchestral score, a symphony of sorrow and triumph that seemed to seep through the hull, through the psychic dampeners, directly into their minds. It was beautiful, tragic, and deeply unsettling. Then came the words, not spoken, but felt. A story. It began with the flicker of a fire in a prehistoric cave, the taste of ash, the fear of the dark. It unfolded into the birth of a language, the joy of a first hunt, the grief of a first murder. The fleet's crew, beings of pure logic and order, were suddenly drowning in a torrent of alien ancestral memory. They felt the sting of salt water as they crossed an ocean in a wooden boat, the burning heat of a desert sun, the bite of Arctic frost. They felt the cruelty of a whip on their backs as they built pyramids for a god king, the exultation of standing on a mountain peak, the quiet love of a mother singing her child to sleep. This was not the chaotic, raw data that had destroyed Yorik's ship. This was a narrative, structured, deliberate, and impossibly intimate. On the bridge of the Will of Order, Admiral Zora fought against it, her disciplined mind a fortress against the tide of emotion. But cracks were beginning to form. She saw an image behind her eyes, a young human girl, no older than her own offspring, hiding in a cellar as bombs fell on her city. Zora could feel the child's terror, so pure and potent it made her own breath catch in her throat. She gritted her teeth, her prosthetic arm whirring as she clenched her fist. "Increase power to the dampeners," she roared. "This is a psychic attack. Maintain course, prepare to fire." But her voice was drowned out by a rising crescendo in the phantom orchestra. The story of humanity was accelerating, moving through its blood-soaked, glorious history. The rise and fall of empires, the birth of art and science, the endless, brutal cycle of war and peace. The crew of the pacification fleet were no longer just observers. They were participants. One Cathar gunner screamed and dropped to his knees, convinced he was a Roman legionary dying in the Teutoburg forest. A communications officer began frantically writing poetry on her console, weeping at the beauty of a Shakespearean sonnet she had never read, and the fleet's cohesion began to break down. The voice of certainty veered off course, its captain having a complete mental breakdown, believing he was Leonardo da Vinci and that his ship was a flying machine he had to sketch before the vision faded. The hand of judgment simply went dead in space, its crew collectively catatonic, lost in a shared dream of the quiet beauty of a Japanese tea ceremony. On the will of order, Zora was losing control. Her tactical displays were flickering, not with data, but with the faces of humanity's greatest monsters and saints. Genghis Khan, Joan of Arc, Einstein, Hitler. "Fire!" she screamed, her voice cracking, trying to give the order that would end the symphony, that would silence the story. For the love of order, fire. A single weapon discharged, a lance of pure and white-hot plasma, powerful enough to boil an ocean, shot from the bow of her ship. It streaked towards Earth, a silent, unstoppable spear of annihilation. But it never arrived. Miles above the Earth's surface, the beam simply stopped. It hung in the blackness of space, its ferocious energy held in perfect stasis, as if caught by an invisible hand. Then, slowly, it began to change. The blinding white light softened, its shape twisting and reforming. It was being rewritten, not by a shield, not by any technology the Xylos could comprehend, but by a sheer act of will. The beam of energy reshaped itself into a flock of 1,000 incandescent birds, which then turned and flew back toward the Xylos fleet, not as an attack, but as a silent, heart-breakingly beautiful procession. At the heart of the chorus, in his chamber beneath the Gobi Desert, the Weaver opened his eyes. They were no longer human. They were twin pools of starlight, reflecting every joy and every sorrow of the species he now embodied. He had caught their weapon. He had heard their fear. Now it was his turn to speak. The symphony in the minds of the Cathar stopped, and a single, clear voice echoed in the sudden silence. It was the voice of the Weaver, the voice of humanity. "You have seen our story," the voice said, resonating in every atom of the crippled fleet. "You have seen what we were. Now, let us show you what we have become." And across the face of the earth, the sky began to burn. The sky did not burn with fire, but with light. It was a soft, pearlescent luminescence that bloomed from the planet's atmosphere, a silent, global dawn that had no sun. For the inhabitants of Earth, it was a moment of profound, inexplicable awe. In cities, cars stopped in the middle of highways as drivers and passengers alike stared up at the heavens. In the remote corners of the world, tribes who had never seen an electric light looked to the sky with a sense of ancient familiarity, as if greeting a long-lost god. There was no panic, no fear, only a pervasive, resonant calm that settled over the planet like a blanket. The ceaseless noise of humanity's collective anxiety, the market fluctuations, the political bickering, the low-level hum of 1 billion private worries simply faded away, replaced by a feeling of shared, silent anticipation. They didn't know what they were waiting for, but for the first time in their history, they were all waiting together. Aboard the crippled remains of the pacification fleet, the experience was anything but calm. The voice of the Weaver had been a psychic thunderclap that shattered the last vestiges of Cathar discipline. The incandescent birds, born from their own weapon, now swirled around their ships, phasing through the hulls as if they were made of smoke. They were not attacking, they were searching. Each bird was a probe, a sliver of the Weaver's consciousness, and as they passed through the Cathar crew, they did not read their minds, but their hearts. They sifted through the layers of rigid military training and cultural dogma, looking for the core of each being. They found fear, duty, and a deep-seated belief in order. But beneath that, they found something else. Doubt. A question planted by the story they had been forced to witness. A question they had never before dared to ask. What if chaos was not a flaw, but a crucible? Admiral Zora stood on her bridge, her weapon lowered, her entire being trembling with a conflict of emotions her species had no name for. The voice had not just spoken to her, it had shown her something, a vision. It was the same human child from the cellar, but she was older now, a woman standing in the ruins of her city. But she was not weeping. She was planting a flower in the rubble, a single, defiant act of creation in the face of absolute destruction. Zora, a being forged in the unyielding logic of war, where destruction was the only answer to defiance, could not process the image. It was a tactical impossibility. It was illogical. It was beautiful. The psychic dampeners on her ship were now useless. Melted slag. The full, undiluted force of the planetary consciousness was washing over her and her crew, not as an attack, but as an invitation. In the Antarctic, Vance watched the global phenomenon on his monitors, his scientific mind struggling to comprehend the scale of what was happening. "What is he doing?" he whispered, his eyes wide. The energy readings were off the charts, but they weren't chaotic. They were structured, harmonic. It was as if the Earth's entire electromagnetic field had been tuned like a musical instrument. "He's not attacking," Vance realized with a dawning sense of awe. "He's broadcasting. He's turning the entire planet into a message." The Volari signal, the ancient warning, suddenly reactivated, but its message had changed. The apologetic lament was gone, replaced by a single repeating phrase in its 50,000-year-old language they sing, the Song of Making. The silence is truly broken. The Song of Making. It was a term Vance had seen in the deepest, most obscure fragments of the Volari texts, a theoretical concept, a myth. It described the ability of a fully realized psychic species to not just manipulate reality, but to create it, to harmonize with the fundamental vibrations of the universe and compose new existence from them. It was the power of a god. From the glowing surface of the earth, things began to rise. They were not ships, but constructs of pure light and thought, given form by the Weaver's will and powered by the collective consciousness of 7 billion souls. They were living ideas. One was shaped like a great, world-encircling serpent, its scales shimmering with the memories of every myth and legend humanity had ever conceived. Another took the form of a vast, intricate tree whose branches were laden with stars, each leaf a testament to a scientific discovery or an artistic masterpiece. A third was an infinite swarm of geometric shapes, constantly shifting and reconfiguring, the physical embodiment of human mathematics and logic. These were the antibodies of Earth's soul, the manifest power of a species that had been forced to turn inward for so long that its imagination had become its greatest, most tangible resource. These constructs ascended to meet the crippled Xylos fleet. They did not fire weapons. They simply enveloped them. The great serpent coiled around the will of order, its body of light passing harmlessly through the hull. But as it did, the ship's systems began to change. The rigid, angular architecture of the Cathar Bridge softened, its lines curving into more organic shapes. The harsh red of the emergency alerts mellowed into a soft, calming blue. The ship's AI, no longer screaming, began to hum the Debussy piece from the Hand of Inevitability. But now it was a full, rich orchestration. It was not being destroyed, it was being healed. It was being understood. Admiral Zora watched as the serpent's head, a majestic construct of pure thought, phased through the viewport and hovered before her. It had no face, but she felt its gaze upon her, and in that gaze, she felt no malice, only a profound, ancient sadness, and a question. Why did you come here to break what was already broken? The question echoed in her soul. Back in the Gobi Desert, Kaylin Reed watched the same events on her own monitors, but her reaction was not one of awe. It was fury. "This is not the plan," she snarled, her knuckles white as she gripped the console. "He was supposed to be a weapon. He was supposed to break them, to make them fear us, to show them the cost of threatening our existence." She had envisioned a psychic holocaust, an attack so devastating it would leave the Xylos so psychologically shattered they would never again dare to enter this sector of space. But this was something else. This was a display of creation, of healing. It was a gesture of peace from a position of absolute power. "He's showing them mercy," she spat, the word tasting like poison in her mouth. "After everything they have done, after everything they were about to do, he offers them understanding. It's weak. It's the Vance doctrine all over again." She turned to the technician monitoring the Weaver. "Sever his connection to the chorus. I'm taking direct control." The technician looked at her, his face ashen with fear. "Director, I can't. He's not just connected to them anymore. He's connected to everything. The network is planetary, universal, even. Trying to sever the link now would be like trying to sever a star from its own gravity." Reed drew a plasma pistol from her hip, her movements sharp and precise. "Then I will do it myself." She marched towards the Weaver's chamber, her mind a cold storm of rage and betrayal. She had spent her life believing that humanity's only path to survival was through dominance, through proving that they were the most dangerous predator in the galactic jungle. The Weaver's display of compassionate, creative power was a rejection of her entire ideology, and she could not abide it. As she entered the chamber, the sheer psychic pressure was like a physical blow. The air hummed, and the Weaver, floating in the center of the room, seemed less like a man and more like a hole in reality, a window into a universe of pure thought. He did not turn to face her, but his voice filled her mind, calm and impossibly vast. "You are afraid, Kaylin." "I am a realist," she retorted, raising the pistol, her hand shaking despite her resolve. "You are showing our enemies our soul. I am here to remind them of our teeth. Our teeth have caused us nothing but pain." The Weaver replied, a universe of sorrow in his voice. "It is our soul that will save us." He showed her an image in her mind, not a memory, but a probability, a future. He showed her the Xylos fleet, not destroyed, but changed. He showed her the Cathar, their rigid belief in order shattered, returning to their collective not with the story of a monster, but of a miracle. He showed her a galaxy that no longer saw Earth as a threat to be contained or a prize to be won, but as a source of something new, something unpredictable and vital, a source of change. Lies, Reed hissed, the pistol aimed at the crystalline core, the source of the Weaver's amplified power. Propaganda. They will learn from this, rearm, and return with weapons that can kill ideas. The only certainty is a disarmed enemy. And what will we become if we do that? The Weaver asked. We will become them. Another empire built on fear. Another monument to order. Is that the only story you want us to tell? Reed's finger tightened on the trigger. For a moment, the fate of two civilizations hung in the balance, resting on the convictions of one woman who could not let go of the belief that the only way to survive in a cage is to become the most dangerous thing in it. Just as she was about to fire, Vance's voice crackled over the chamber's intercom system. Kaylin, you don't understand the Valari. They're not just apologizing, they're coming back. The signal. It's not just a broadcast anymore. It's a beacon. They're not the only ones who remember the silence. They're coming to see what we've become. Reed hesitated, her eyes flickering toward the speaker. In that moment of hesitation, the Weaver acted. He didn't attack her. He simply blew open the door. He let the full, unfiltered, raw consciousness of humanity, every hope, every fear, every act of love and cruelty from its entire history flow into her. Not as a story, but as a single, crushing, beautiful, terrible moment of pure existence. Kaylin Reed screamed, dropped the pistol, and collapsed, her mind finally broken not by an attack, but by the overwhelming, unconditional truth of what she had been trying to both save and unleash. And out in the void, the changed Cathar fleet turned for home, their minds filled with a song, ready to tell the galaxy that the anomaly in the Sol system was not a plague, but a cure. And they were just in time, for on the edge of the galaxy, something ancient and vast, drawn by the song of making, was beginning to stir. The journey home was a silent pilgrimage. Admiral Zora's pacification fleet, now renamed the Witness Fleet by its own crew, moved through the void not with the arrogant precision of a predator, but with the somber grace of monks returning from a revelation. Their ships, once monuments to sterile order, were now living works of art, their internal structures subtly and beautifully warped by the Weaver's song, their corridors echoing with the faint, phantom music of humanity. The Cathar themselves were irrevocably changed. They had gone to Earth expecting to fight a monster and had instead been shown a mirror. The raw, unfiltered humanity they had experienced had not destroyed them. It had cracked open the rigid shell of their cultural conditioning, allowing for something new and unsettling to take root: empathy. They now understood the illogical, self-destructive, and infuriatingly resilient species they had been sent to annihilate. They understood their rage, their sorrow, their art, and their baffling capacity for hope in the face of utter despair. They didn't just have data on humanity anymore. They had felt its soul. Their return to the Xylos Collective sent a shockwave through the Empire. The High Council convened in an emergency session, their 72 representatives listening in stunned silence as Admiral Zora, a decorated war hero, laid down her ceremonial blade and spoke not of conquest, but of transcendence. She described the song of making, the constructs of pure thought, and the voice of the Weaver. She played the sensor logs, which were now less a record of tactical data and more a symphony of impossible energy signatures and psychic resonance. Most of the council dismissed it as a mass hallucination. the result of a sophisticated psychic weapon that had infected the entire fleet. They voted to quarantine the Witness fleet and assemble a new, larger armada, one shielded with technology scavenged from forgotten wars against telepathic species. They would not make the same mistake twice. Earth would be silenced, its cognitive contagion cauterized from the galactic map. But the seed of doubt had been planted. A handful of species on the council, those whose own cultures were more mystical or philosophical, were not so quick to dismiss Zora's testimony. The story of Earth began to spread. A forbidden legend whispered through back channels and encrypted networks. It was a story of a caged god, a broken people who had forged their suffering into a power beyond comprehension, for a galaxy suffocated by the Xylos's benevolent tyranny, a galaxy where passion and chaos were treated as diseases. The idea of Earth was a spark of terrifying, intoxicating freedom. Rebellions, long simmering on subjugated worlds, began to flare with new purpose, their leaders now invoking the name of the unknown, distant world as a symbol of defiance. The collective's perfect order was beginning to fray, not because of an attack, but because of a story. Back on Earth, a new era had begun. The global luminescence had faded, but the sky was not the same. At night, the stars seemed brighter, closer. The sense of shared consciousness, the silent harmony that had settled over the planet, remained. It wasn't a hive mind. Individuality was not erased, but a new layer of existence had been added, a quiet, background awareness of the collective human experience. It manifested in small, miraculous ways. Crime rates plummeted. International disputes were resolved with a bewildering speed and sincerity. A new renaissance of art and science bloomed overnight as people found themselves unconsciously drawing upon the shared well of human knowledge and creativities. Humanity had, in essence, been introduced to itself. At the center of it all was the Weaver. He was no longer just a man in a chamber, but a planetary presence, his consciousness intertwined with the Earth itself. He was the guardian of the new harmony, the conductor of the ongoing song. Elias Vance found his life's purpose inverted. For decades, he had been a jailer. Now, he was a diplomat. With the Weaver's guidance, he began the slow, monumental task of preparing humanity for what was to come. He knew the Xylos would return, and they would be ready this time. But the more pressing threat was the one he had learned of from the Volari beacon. The others who remembered the silence. Beings from the dawn of the galaxy, ancient powers who had been part of the alliance that had imprisoned humanity. They were not empires of metal and law like the Xylos. They were something far older, far stranger. They were the reason for the cage. And they were coming to inspect the broken lock. Kaylin Reed, broken and remade by her forced communion with the Weaver, became his most fervent ally. The raw truth of humanity she had experienced had burned away her fear-driven ideology, replacing it with a fierce, protective devotion. Her tactical genius, once aimed at turning humanity into a weapon, was now focused on defending its newfound peace. The first of the ancients to arrive was not a fleet, but a single entity. It appeared in high orbit without warning, a being that looked like a fracture in space, a living paradox of impossible geometry and shifting light. It was a Valerie. It had come not as a conqueror, but as a penitent. Its message, broadcast directly into the mind of the Weaver, was one of profound regret. We were wrong. It communicated, its thoughts a cascade of crystalline sorrow. We feared your chaos, so we built you a prison of pain. We did not realize you would learn to use pain as a building material. We did not come to fight you. We came to learn. The arrival of the Volari was a turning point. They had been the architects of the cage, and their return as students, not masters, sent a powerful message across the galaxy. It was a message the Second Xylos Armada was not prepared for. When they arrived, 10 times the size of the First Fleet, they found Earth was not alone. It was flanked by a ghost fleet of Volari ships, shimmering constructs of light that defied all sensor readings, and the Earth itself was different. The Weaver did not meet them with a song this time. He met them with silence, as the new Xylos fleet, shielded and armed to the teeth, moved into firing position. Their advanced psychic shielding began to fail, not because it was being attacked, but because it was being deconstructed. The Weaver, with the help of the Valera, was not projecting a feeling at them. He was rewriting the physical laws upon which their technology was based. Their shields dissolved into harmless equations. Their weapon systems were rendered inert. Their fundamental constants of energy transfer temporarily suspended. They were left powerless, floating in the dark, in ships that had become little more than metal tombs. Then, the Weaver gave them a choice. Not a surrender, but an invitation. He opened a channel, not to the fleet's commander, but to every single soldier on every ship. He did not show them humanity's past this time. He showed them its future. He showed them a vision of a galaxy not ruled by a single, monolithic order, but enriched by 1,000 different, chaotic, beautiful cultures. He showed them Cathar poets, human engineers, and Valerie artists working together. He showed them a future where strength was not measured by the ability to control, but by the capacity to create. And then he sent them home, their weapons silent, their minds filled with a vision of a future they had never been allowed to imagine. The Xylos Collective did not survive the return of its second fleet. The vision the Weaver had shared spread faster than any rebellion. It was an idea more powerful than any armada. The Empire crumbled not in a storm of war, but in a quiet dawn of mass awakening. Systems seceded, choosing the uncertainty of freedom over the sterile comfort of order. The age of the Xylos was over, ended not by a bang, but by a whisper of a better way. In the final scene of humanity's long imprisonment, Elias Vance stood in the Antarctic Command Center's Misits, now a museum to a bygone era. The red alert markers were gone from the world map, replaced by the soft, interconnected glow of a truly global civilization. The Weaver, his physical form now little more than a suggestion of a man made of starlight, stood beside him. It is done. The Weaver's thought echoed in the quiet room. The cage is gone. The story can truly begin. Vance looked at the star charts, no longer seeing a hostile void to hide from, but an open road, a universe of neighbors to meet, of stories to share and to learn. The warning that had begun their journey, "Do not go to Earth, the species is not as it seems," had been proven true. But in a way no one could have ever predicted. Earth was not a trap. It was a crucible that had forged a new kind of power, a power not of dominance, but of connection. Humanity, the anomaly, the cognitive plague, had become the galaxy's immune response, the cure for the silent, orderly disease of fear. They were no longer prisoners. They were the architects of a new, chaotic, and beautiful future.